If this is home to you, if welcome to Vision Weekend, by the way, if this is home, if these are your people, if this is your church, if this is the community with whom you pursue God and with whom you serve Helena and the community around us, my hope for you, my sincere prayer for you, I don't always pray for you, I'm just kidding, but right, like I really did pray this, that you would find this morning to be really, really energizing, that it would be uplifting, that it would be encouraging, knowing that you have invested much time and energy and resource Sunday mornings and Saturday mornings and any number of things in between. I realize that sometimes you can get tired, and sometimes familiarity breeds contempt, and sometimes you get weary. And so my hope and prayer for you this morning is that you leave energized, and that there's this kind of unspoken worship that rises up between your guts and the heart of God. For those of you that, like, you're with us, maybe this is your first weekend, maybe you're with us off and on, maybe you're with us often, but for you the issue isn't Jesus, like you believe in him, you follow him, but maybe for you the issue is the church, that you hold the church at arm's distance. You've been wounded, you're suspicious, you've been grossed out, you wonder about the motives, you've been misunderstood. You're in good company. I think you're in good company in every church, but you're in particularly good company here. Like many of the people here can relate to your story. And my hope for you, because we hurt lots of people, that's really what I'm getting at there. Like we just wound them like crazy and so they can relate. Never thought of how stupid that sounded until I just said it just then. In reality, though, my hope for you this morning is that you would catch a glimpse of what Jesus had in mind with what the scriptures often refer to as his bride. That you would understand that God is about way more than just getting souls into heaven, but uniting people who serve communities together and who glorify him much more effectively in the context of relationships, in the context of community than they do individually. And I don't say that because I think we've got it figured out. I don't say that because I think we're the ideal picture of church. Anything but, quite frankly. We're not the ideal. But I do think that there's some glimpses where you can see what like the church is about and supposed to be about. And for those of you that, like, you're not even really sure where you're at with Jesus, can I first say, like, I'm honored that you're here. We all are. We being, like, everybody who calls this place home, work really, really hard to make this a place where you can belong without believing, without agreeing with us theologically. And obviously we have high hopes for you developing a relationship with Jesus, but we want this to be a space that you can exist in and disagree with us. And so, thanks for being here. And my hope for you is, sometimes the whole God conversation is so abstract. It's so intellectual. And certainly there's a place for that. But the great thing about Jesus is he takes the conversation from one of intelligentsia to one of, like, being a personal being. That he doesn't just want you to believe in him in the cells within your brain, but he wants you to know him personally. And my hope for you this morning is that you would have some encounter with him in that regard. And I think for all of us, I think it's an opportunity to evaluate. Because we all know that the reality is that you can create things with lofty, lofty ambitions. We all do that. Like, no couple stands at the altar and says, let's do a marginal job for a few years and then go our own separate ways. Right? No parent gets handed their first child and says, I'm shooting for mediocre. Right, like it doesn't happen. You don't get your first job and hope to be the one that gets let go before the whatever it's called. What is it called? Probation is over. Like it's really easy to start things with great ambition and ultimately not to realize them. And I'm as aware as you are that that's all the more possible within church. First week we put a pool table on the stage, not this one, and we use this game of pool to illustrate who we wanted to be, that the game of pool works when you take all the pool balls and you put them together and then you scatter them, and there's this rhythm of gathering and scattering, and we said, let's exist in that way, let's serve in that way, let's matter in that way. So to say that is one thing. To really live it, to really do it, that's another thing entirely. And so I think it's a chance for you to evaluate, like, are we existing the way we've set out to exist? So Vision Weekend, if you've not experienced it with us before, is this thing that we do every September, kind of this weekend every September. And the design of the weekend is ultimately to look back and go, where have we been? To celebrate what God has been doing, and then to take account for where we currently are, before we then go, here's the stuff that we think God is talking about with us in the future. So if you're a guest, you kind of picked a unique weekend, in some ways a great weekend, and in some ways the service, I suppose, isn't representative of what's all that normal. I'd like to pray, and then we're going to jump into some data. God, this is your church. And we loosen our grip on it. We're grateful for where you've taken us. We're hopeful for where you're leading us into, for what you're leading us into. And yet, God, we just acknowledge that this is your deal, this is your party, this is your gig. We're grateful for the opportunities you've given us. We're grateful for the energy you've given us to respond to them. It's really my prayer, Lord, that you're worshiped this morning in ways that far surpass a typical weekend around here. We love you. Amen. So we had to take a survey. How's this for technology? Got all these technology things that we added this morning, and I've got a stack of paper. We had you take the survey online. 108 people took the survey. We think that's about a third of us. But we also think that it's pretty representative of who we are within reason, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So we're just going to kind of run through some data. We thought it'd be fun for us to know a little bit about who we are. So first of all, with regard to age, you can see that about 70% of us are in that 20 to 39 range, which on one hand is encouraging because there's the range of people that typically don't like to go to church, although I think it's a little high. We didn't set out to be a next-gen church. I don't think we are. To me, the great encouragements of Narrate are the high number of 40 and 50 and 60 and 70-somethings who are pulling just as much weight as anybody else and investing just as much as anyone else. So I think they're not represented here because I think there's like they're on their typewriter. You are not on the internet. Just kidding. They're on their dial-up internet. So there you go. Marital status, 21% single. I don't know what that means other than, again, cool. Those are people who have lots of things to do on Sunday mornings and Saturday mornings and things of that nature. And I think we'll get better in this category. We know that Helena is an extraordinarily difficult place to be single and a great place to be a family. So I think we need to continue to invest in how we get better at reaching those people. A third of Narrate do not have kids. Isn't that fascinating? So a high percentage of married people, and yet a third of us don't have kids, which says we have lots of young couples who aren't having kids, which is brilliant, I suppose. I don't know, but just kidding. I love my kids. Really what we're trying to figure out with the next one is how hipster are we? Facial hair? Do you have it? With what kind of frequency and what kind of variation? Here's an interesting fact about the facial hair question is it was, I think, 56 or 57% of people who took the survey indicated that they were women, not men. But only 54% responded that they don't have facial hair because they're a woman. There's some really awkward ways to interpret that data. Or we could just conclude that many of them are so passionate about their spouses not having facial hair that they marked, never, my spouse is opposed. The women are just this is how passionate I am about that. But nonetheless, 23% says it varies, which means that we're hipster. How long have you lived in Helena? I hope for obvious reasons we're very intrigued by this. We want to do a great job of reaching people new to the community, and so we're at 8%. We'll get better. We've dialed in some things with Google Analytics and stuff, and I think we're going to get better at that. And yet, also, you see this very representative swath. We're not a bunch of people new to Helena, and we're not a bunch of people who've been here forever, which I think is awesome and an indicator of health. This means that we're earning trust with locals and established people, and yet at the same time, people who are new to town are finding us. On average, how many Sundays a month do you attend? In church world, once a month. This is kind of a national statistic. In church world, once a month is the new every week is kind of the lingo. So they're saying that on any given Sunday, a quarter of your church is there, and you can see for us, we're doing a lot better than that, over 70%. Again, I think it's a little high based upon the data, but still encouraging to see that. And I think where the compliment lies there is with the high number of volunteers that work really, really hard here on Sunday mornings to create great experiences, to knock away monotony and create worship services that are undistracting, and to keep it fresh in such a way that people don't wake up and go, well, I already know what they're going to do, so I don't need to go. So good job. Thank you, those of you that volunteer in myriad ways on Sundays. Next question. Just getting into important stuff. How often do you pee on the men's bathroom floor? We have this growing issue. It's unbelievable to me. And so and also I'm not very funny, so I use it for lots of comedic relief, but we just wanted to know, like, who does it? And what's worth pointing out is that 9% of you said regularly. Another 23% said, no, but my kids probably do, which means, like, so 3, right? Like 1, 2, 3. One of you is peeing on the floor. It's either Marv or Kyle, right? Like, I mean, it's unbelievable. And it's not, like, we've tried everything. We've raised the urinal. We've lowered the urinal. Like, I think we'll just make the urinal wall. Like, last week, I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I dribbled. It was like, no, I'm going to go over here. So I'm not sure what is going on here, but get some splints. I don't know, but sorry, let's keep going. So, okay, so how did you get introduced to, oh, man. Do we have to go home after that? God, strike me dead. Okay, how did you get introduced to Narrate? Again, I hope for obvious reason, this is an important question, and what I want you to see is the obvious. 40% of people said, a friend. A friend. And what that tells me is that in many ways, what we set out to do is working, because what we work very hard, volunteers and staff, is to create gatherings where you can trust us, where you know we're not going to embarrass you, we're not going to embarrass your friend, we're not going to talk about peeing on the bathroom floor and stuff like that. I mean, But seriously, like, it's going to be a positive experience for them, and it's not going to make your friendship awkward. And so the fact that you trust us that much, thank you. Good job. I was talking to a business owner in town this last week who I've been picking his brain and learning from him, and I was asking him how they think about advertising and marketing and things like that. And he said, we don't do much. They're pretty established. And he said, really what our MO is at this point is we want to give people a great product and a great experience, and we want to trust that if it really is that, they're going to tell their friends. And then, I mean, he's not a church guy, and you could see him kind of looking at me like, as I'm trying to apply this to my situation. He said, well, I suppose it's the same with church, huh? And I said, yeah. I said, let me bounce this off you. Here's the way I think about this. I said, is absolutely we depend upon people to tell their friends, and yet the moment that I have to stand on the stage and say, hey, everybody, invite your friends next week, like, we've lost. And he was like, exactly. Makes sense to me. So, good job. And the other cool thing is there's some areas on there where we're growing as well. And there's a lot of you that would like to date Lenny. So after the service, Lenny will be up here. He'll be taking applications. He's also going to be looking at the potential dowry, and so we'll go from there. Okay. Do you feel connected relationally? 45% say yes, 28% say kind of, 15% say no, and I've tried, and another 12% say, well, no, but I've not tried. Now, here's what's fascinating. My friend Joe, who's an engineer and wacko about statistics, he came up to me after the service and he said, Adam, 70% of, I'm going to cheat. 70% of people have scattered with us, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, at least once this year. And roughly 30% of people aren't connected. And we're a church that said, hey, if you want to connect with us, like, come serve with us. And that's not a manipulative thing. That's not a controlling thing. That's just we're so passionate about serving that we want to make sure that we make that the priority, believing that relationships will follow. And so we'll continue to work hard, but if you're not connected, like, it tells me that it works for people who try it, and yet it's a hard place to connect if you want to and serve with us. We also did a lot this year on spiritual disciplines, and so we wanted to ask, like, how are people doing at getting time with the Lord alone? And this, to me, is maybe the most encouraging one on the whole deal, that over 50% say at least 4 times a week, which is awesome. And there's a very small percentage of you that go like, yeah, I'm not ever cracking my Bible. I'm not ever spending any time in solitude with God. So way to go. Now, so let's zoom out a little bit and get inside of, we talk about gathering and scattering. And so let's talk about those areas a little bit. Scattering. So I already talked about this. We asked, have you joined us in at least one scattering opportunity? 71% of you went yes. Like, just feel that, will you? Like, we said we want to be a church that matters. That isn't just about Sunday morning, but it's about the other 6 days, and periodically we're going to matter together. 71% of you have done that. That is tremendous. Way to go. Those opportunities, we've got a list of them up there. It was, we think 18 of them this year. Wood splitting, and there's a whole host of things. The other area that we think about are what we call organic opportunities. And those are ones that they're not like master plans. We don't schedule them 6 weeks out. We don't plan on them for months. Organic opportunities are opportunities that come to the surface because life happens. Whether that's death and we help with a funeral or help make arrangements for a funeral, whether that's, in one case, a gal who was trying to get out of an abusive relationship and couldn't afford the posting that she needed to put in the newspaper in order to make that legal. And so we went, yeah, we have a budget for that. We can help with that. Or more recently, here's an example of an organic opportunity is when Lindsay came to Sarah and said, hey, my husband's boss's wife is about to have a baby and they're not connected to Narrate, but I'd love to get them meals like we do for moms from Narrate, and so can we do that? And Sarah said yes, and so Sarah bought her lunch, and they get together and they just, Sarah says, let me show you how I organize this and what we've learned in this, and then who's your network from Narrate? So I'm going to help you reach out to your own friendship group, and then we're going to rally them to help you serve your husband's boss's wife. So the way we think about organic opportunities is we want to say yes as often as we possibly can, because we feel like that's where we're prone to get inward, is we start going like, we don't do that and we don't have time for that and we don't have the money for that. So we've literally started this year tracking every time one rises to the surface and how often we're able to say yes, because we feel like that's a disposition that we want to live with long term. Here's a neat story when it comes to scattering stuff. You remember that one of the more recent ones was the foster care gift card mugs that we did for 5 foster families. And check this out. This guy wrote on Facebook after the fact. He said, I just opened my front door and was handed one of these bouquets. And the year that my wife and I have done foster care, this is the single most thoughtful gift that anyone has ever done for us. Our bouquet was even more awesome than the one pictured. We're floored. We are amazed, but most of all, we are in awe that somebody cares. Foster care is the single most difficult thing that we have ever done in our lives. And this expression of thanks from Narrate Church means more to us than you will ever know. I'll never forget this. God bless you. Now, speaking of organic, Tony King came up to me after the first service and she said, here's the story with that guy. That guy's a friend of mine, and we already had these 5 that we asked from the state to give us 5 families that they'd like to encourage. And I went to Sarah and said, I've got this friend who I think could use encouraged because we do that too, and that was him. So it's this combination of the organic as well as the scheduled, if you will. The other way that we serve is the Sunday morning team. And so we asked, are you a part of a Sunday morning team? And check this out. 52% of you are. So 48% said no. 52% of people at Narrate go, yep, I usher, I run sound, I help with setup, I help with teardown, I teach kids. I mean, there's a million different opportunities, but 52%. So 71% go, yep, I scatter, and 52% go, yep, Sunday morning, I'm on a team. Awesome. Here's where I think, here's what caused me to think this survey is fairly accurate is, watch this. We asked, when did you first start attending Narrate? 27% of the people who took the survey said within the last year. And what we know this year is that our weekend attendance grew by 26%, which again is stellar. You can see, so our average weekend attendance this year was 235, and that was Christmas Eve 2 years ago. So awesome, and we keep thinking this thing is going to level off. Pessimistically, I do, and we grew again this summer. Churches don't grow in the summer. We were up 40% on Labor Day last weekend from the year before. So I think that's about trust, I guess, is the way I think about that. Like, the community is just starting to trust us, and thank you for those of you who go to work on making gatherings fantastic. Another question is the financial piece. We asked, do you partner with us financially through tithes and offerings? And again, 66% of you said yeah, and another 27% said every once in a while. But here's the cool thing. So we've got a graph. You can see that our giving grew by 15% this year over last year. But best of all is, if you've been with us for a while, we've been working hard at making this 3rd year a self-sustaining year. In other words, where our giving was greater than our spending. And it was. Like, we are a church in the black as of this year. So, way to go. Thank you for those of you who worked hard. And here's what I want to say about that. If I could, I'm just going to, I think it's easy to sit in the chair and assume that, that's the case because there's some token people of means who give. And I want you to know that's not the case. I mean, we have people of more means than others, of course, who give. But there's young parents who could justify more than any of us, I don't have any extra. And there's young families. And I'm not saying that to manipulate or guilt. I just want the full expression of the worship of that to get caught. That is a truly collaborative effort. 66% of people. Good job. If we can, where I'd like to go for just a little bit is I want to ask this question, what if we're not special? And what I mean by that is, what if it would be unwise and grossly inaccurate to explain our success but by saying that, well, we're just an extraordinarily talented bunch. Like what if that does a gross injustice to the real understanding of the situation? And yet simultaneously, because I know like, okay, yeah, we're not special, we're blessed, right? What if that's just as inaccurate? What if it's just as dangerous to say, oh yeah, we're extraordinarily blessed. God's grace is everywhere in that place. I guess what I'm getting at is what if either one of those answers alone is wrong, is misguided? Like, can we really explain it by just one of them? Now, don't get me wrong. I think there's lots of victories. I had lunch a few months ago with a guy who he put words to some things for me that I haven't been able to put words to. He's a guy in his 50s and has been around church most of his adult life. And he said, Adam, what I got to tell you, I've never really fit in church culture. I've never really liked church culture. And I love Narrate. And for me, that was a trophy, if you will, a celebration of something that we've worked hard at from the very beginning. As we said, like, we're mostly a bunch of people who don't particularly like church. And that could get arrogant. I'll be the first to admit that. That could get conceited. That could go like, we're not like other churches. And I don't think any of us mean it like that. But if we're honest, we can go like, we're made up of a bunch of people who don't particularly enjoy church culture, but we really love like Jesus and his desire for a community to serve the greater community. And his going like that's a victory. Another story that is a high point for me that I've told is at Ales for Trails, actually. It was about halfway through the event. And this friend and I who helps lead the event and isn't a part of Narrate, but is a part of leading that event, he and I were standing, you know how guys do, like shoulder to shoulder, not looking intently into each other's eyes, but we were standing at the ground shoulder to shoulder having this very deep conversation. Like seriously, like it was just like this. And he's over here and he's like, dude, Adam. I'm like, yeah. He said, I haven't been around organized religion in decades. And I said, me neither. We're very disorganized. And he said, but like these people who are making this event happen from your church, they're amazing. We're like, yes, like that's the hallowing of God's name. Or at that same event, actually, the mayor pulled me aside, and some of you have heard this story, but he pulled me aside and he said, Adam, we were just in a meeting this week and we were talking about the pine beetle kill, and literally what was said was that like we don't know where we would be in our community with this issue were it not for this group called Narrate who's helped split it and distribute it and all that, and he kind of gave me the pat on the back, and then he said, and now this, and he's referencing like that we've collaborated with all these different people in the community to make that centennial bike path, walk path happen. He said, now this. And he said, Adam, most churches, they just pray. And then he hit me on the back again and he said, Jesus Christ, Adam, what the hell kind of church is this? Now, I hope that doesn't offend you. What I want to argue is like, that's the hallowing of God's name. That's a guy who has had it all figured out and explained and thought he understood Jesus' priority, and he's just trying to figure it out, and you've caused him to think afresh, I would think, about all that stuff. So I'm not suggesting that there aren't victories behind us, but what if we need to be careful about the way we understand and explain those? That's what I really want to spend some time on this morning. There's a story in the Gospels. It's become one of my favorite parables in the Gospels, largely because, quite frankly, it speaks to this growing bent in my own thinking about God and life and creation. And I'm going to read it from the Message just because some of you have heard it so often that I want to at least try to jar your thinking. He said, it's also like a man going off on an extended trip. He called his servants together and delegated responsibilities. To one he gave $5,000, to another $2,000, to a third $1,000, depending on their abilities. Then he left. Right off, the first servant went home to work and doubled his master's investment. The second did the same, but the man with a single $1,000 dug a hole and carefully buried his master's money. After a long absence, the master of these three servants came back and settled up with them. The one given $5,000 showed him how he had doubled his investment. His master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant with $2,000 showed how he also had doubled his master's investment. His master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant given $1,000 said, Master, I know you have high standards and hate careless ways, that you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid I might disappoint you. Like, make no allowances for error? Is that even accurate? I was afraid I would disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place and secured your money. Here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. The master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, where at least I would have gotten a little interest. Take the 1,000 and give it to the one who risked the most. And get rid of this play it safe who won't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. Now, to be textually accurate, what we have to acknowledge is that this is a parable that Jesus has, he's telling to speak to the Jewish establishment. He's saying, like, you've blown it in many ways. But on a bigger picture, isn't this a story about both God's grace and human fortitude? This kind of mysterious interconnectedness between God gives things, and he gives opportunities, and he gives responsibilities, and yet people have to realize them. They have to act upon them. I mean, the guys given 5,000, 2,000, 1,000, they had no control over what they were given. It just was. It was what it was. Like, that was God's deal. And theologically, many would refer to that as prevenient grace. Prevenient grace speaks to the fact that God has to move first, that he takes that first step. And oftentimes we talk about this purely from salvation standpoints, but I think Eugene Peterson rightly argues in The Contemplative Pastor, like, no, this applies to our everyday walk with Jesus, that there's prevenient grace. There's the giving of opportunities, and that's what we see here. But does the giving of opportunities guarantee a certain return? Like, just because God graced them that, does that guarantee a certain type of return? I mean, has LeBron James been afforded opportunities that most of us haven't? None of us, perhaps. Athletic ability, size, things outside of his control. Has he been afforded some grace? But does that guarantee that he's an NBA All-Star? David Bazan, a well-liked musician by many of you, afforded lots of incredible musical acumen. Does that guarantee a certain return with that from that grace? Bill Gates. I mean, has he been given some incredible opportunities that most of us haven't, both circumstantially and when he came along, and intelligence and all those different things? Well, absolutely he has, but does that guarantee the return that he got? No, it's grossly simplistic, isn't it? Grossly oversimplistic. That to recognize that we need God's blessing, that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is the human effort side, the work ethic side, the fortitude side, the side that says, I take the opportunities given me and I do something with them. I take the seed and I make it grow. See, in Genesis 1, God says to people, I'm going to make you in my image. I'm going to make you image bearers. And as we talked about a couple weeks ago, central to that is God saying, here's responsibility. Like, I'm going to give you some. I would argue that in this parable, Jesus is pointing out that some people take the grace given them and they do something with it. They bring a return from it. And some do nothing. And this is really a story about two people who, yes, you can explain their success by God's grace, but you also better include the effort side. You also better include the fact that they captured it. It's a story about two people who did, and one guy who said, I reject that responsibility. I'm not going to do anything with it. That is, I think, the way that we have to begin to understand who we are and whatever victories we've had is, yes, God has given us opportunities, and yes, there's a lot of you that have worked extraordinarily hard to capture and seize those opportunities. Dave Ramsey has this theorem. He calls it his momentum theorem, and I think it captures this idea. He says that momentum is fixed or focused intensity over time times God. Doesn't that capture this parable? That yes, there's a human side. That's what he's saying. You have to work hard and you have to work consistently and you better work hard. And then there's a God side. Like, yes, you're going to need God's grace. You're going to need his abilities. You're going to need his acumen because you might not have the ability, and then it's a hobby. It shouldn't be a career. It's the two things combined. This gal, Leanne, she says continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. There's a both and, isn't there? And yet there's a human tendency to try to unravel it and make sense of these two things that are so woven together. And yet when we separate them, I would argue we don't end up with two things. We end up with nothing. It's what the Jews called block thinking. That there's this thing and there's this God's grace side and there's this human response side, and we can't explain the relationship between them two, but if we get rid of one, we ruin the whole deal. What happens when people explain their success purely by God's grace? We end up with first century Judaism, I think. Guys, that Jesus says, hey guys, like the scribes and the Pharisees, they have some great things to say about God's word, but don't do anything that they do. Why? Because they feel so entitled that they're above the law, they don't have to obey, they get sloppy, they get lazy. John the Baptist says to him, like, don't look at me and tell me you're a son of Abraham. God could turn these rocks into sons of Abraham if that's what he wants to do. What is that? It's people who so explain everything by God's grace that it results in laziness and arrogance and any number of other things. And yet what happens to people who explain all their success by their ability, by their talent? We end up with incredibly arrogant, entitled, mean-spirited people. Like, really, you end up with the exact same thing at either extreme. See, I would argue that you can't look at our victories and say that it's because we're extraordinarily talented, and you can't look at it as because we're extraordinarily blessed. No, it's because you all have begged God for grace and opportunity. And then when it was given, you got out of bed at 7:30 in the morning to go split firewood for 5 hours, despite the fact that it was snowing outside and it was cold and you had to work the next day. Like, I would argue that God, you begged God for grace, and he gave you musical talent, which means you get a set list on Tuesday and you practice your songs on your own, and then on Thursday you get to the rehearsal at 5:30 and your wife is stuck or your husband's stuck taking care of the kids, and you practice for 3 hours and you get home, and then on Sunday morning you get here to be ready to play at 7 o'clock and you don't get to leave until 12:30, and on Monday you go to work. God gave you grace and you've worked hard. I think it does a gross injustice to everyone in this room if we say, no, we're just blessed. No, we're talented. No. It's because, like, these families bring their kids, and so you attend the first service and teach their kids at the second. It's the effort and the grace side. It's because God gave you this ability to make money, and you, like, give it every month. And go, I so believe in this, I'm investing in this. No, it's grossly inaccurate to say we're talented, and it's grossly inaccurate to say we're blessed. It's because there's this extraordinary group of people who work hard at begging for God's grace and realizing the opportunities he affords them. And I think what's true organizationally is also true individually, isn't it? When you look back at your life and you see the victories, like the marriage that's grown healthier, the finances that are more in order, the relationship with God that's better, isn't it the same scenario? Like, in some sense, you've been on your knees, either literally or figuratively, begging God to show up in your marriage and your finances. And yet, in the other sense, you're more invested in that through your own calorie burning than you ever have been before. And when you look back and you see something discouraging, I think it's fair to ask the question, like, is that person that much harder to be married to? Or have you stopped praying the way you used to pray, asking God's grace the way you used to ask, and did you stop working as hard as you used to work? Now, I know that could be grossly simplistic in some of your situations. Like, are your finances, like, that much more difficult because you make that much less? Or was there a time where you took a lot more seriously, like, God, you provide, and I steward? And you took that very seriously. Like, life isn't not this weird, unexplainable combination of those two things. And though we don't know where the intersection is, it's there, isn't it? And so I would say that we stand at this crossroads, and we should celebrate many of the victories, and we should look back and go, that's been a blast. But the real question is, like, what is going to be our posture moving forward? Do we assume success because we think we're extraordinarily blessed or extraordinarily gifted? Or do we realize, no, God has given us opportunities, yes, and we need to continue to ask him to do that, and yet we need to continue to work hard too. I guess on Vision Weekend, the first thing I wanted to begin to talk about is this idea of let's think accurately about whatever victories we see. And really ask the question, like, so are we done? Has it been a good run? Are we too tired to seize opportunities again? Or are we going to once again go, like, God, send us the opportunities and we'll get out of bed and we'll sacrifice, and we'll do what we've got to do to proclaim your story to this community. Like, if the story is true, if the text is true, your marriage can be better still. And so can your finances, and so can your relationship with Christ. Like, there doesn't have to be a plateau, and if there's a low point, well, then even all the easier to get encouraged. And as a church, I feel like people have been asking me lately where I'm at, and I might have misrepresented a couple weeks ago, like, there is no discouragement in me. I honestly go, like, I think we're just getting started. But the key is, do we keep asking God for his grace, and are we willing to continue to seize those opportunities? And for you personally, like, that's salvation. That's what those people in those baptism videos are talking about. God draws near, and yet you've got to choose what you're going to do with that. Will you receive it? Let's sing a little more. First, let's pray. God, thanks for life. Thanks for responsibility, though sometimes we wish we didn't have any. God, I pray for people who even now are thinking of areas of their life where maybe they've let slide their attention to begging you for grace and favor. Or maybe they sense that they've gotten lazy in an area. And more than that, God, I pray that you are worshiped as people maybe understand a little more clearly the way this thing seems to work, that yes, we need you to provide opportunities both personally and organizationally, corporately, and yet you ask us to do our part and do the work. For people wrestling with knowing you and following you, Jesus, would you make it abundantly clear that it's a grace deal, it's not an earned deal, and yet the response is a life of surrender. As Jay said, a life where we just let you teach us through. We love you. Next week, we're going to actually talk about vision. So sorry, it was kind of a late iteration in the week. We just realized, like, we got too much material, and Adam can't talk that long because he's boring. So next week will be the part 2 of Vision Weekend because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So sorry to jerk your chain, but we got a burger for you at Spring Meadow in an hour. See ya.